The chamber was already thick with tension when Stephen Miller's voice sliced through the air like a blade. He leaned forward, words sharp, tone dismissive, cutting across Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence, as though her presence were nothing more than an inconvenience. Chairs shifted, pens tapped against wooden desks, and the room seemed to tighten with every syllable he hurled in her direction. But Crockett didn't flinch, her eyes steady and unwavering, locked onto him with a mixture of composure and fire, a stare that seemed to say, "You may think you control this stage, but you're only setting the trap you'll soon fall into." The interruptions piled up one after another, each sharper, each more arrogant than the last. By the sixth time, even the walls felt like they were leaning in to catch what might happen next. Reporters glanced at each other, cameras refocused, aides whispered nervously behind their folders. Miller's words echoed with the arrogance of someone who believed he could drown out not only her voice, but the truth she carried. And yet, Crockett held her ground. No raised voice, no frantic gestures, only the simmering power of patience. She let him swing, let him posture, let him unravel in his own noise. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The narrator's voice cuts through like a heartbeat beneath the noise. 6 times he tried to silence her. 6 times he failed. What she said the 7th time left the entire chamber frozen. A hush fell. It was the kind of hush that comes before a storm breaks, before the air itself decides which way history will bend. Eyes darted between them, the so-called strategist versus the woman he sought to dismiss. In that stillness, Crockett drew breath, not hurried, not forced, but deliberate. A moment stretched into eternity. What came next would not just be words, it would be a reckoning. The chamber didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from a reversal so sharp, so undeniable that no interruption could bury it. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand how the room got so tense in the first place. The hearing wasn't just another meeting in a long list of political rituals. It was a battlefield dressed in mahogany desks and polished microphones, a stage where America's values were being tested in real time. The committee room carried the kind of gravity that every citizen feels but rarely sees, where words are not just spoken, but etched into the narrative of democracy itself. And in that room sat Stephen Miller, a man whose reputation for cutting down opponents had become almost theatrical, and Jasmine Crockett, a woman who represented not just her district but an entire generation's demand to be heard. Every chair creak, every paper shuffle seemed louder than usual that day. The stakes weren't abstract, they were painfully real. What was at issue wasn't merely policy or partisanship, it was respect, it was dignity. It was the age-old question: whose voice deserves to carry weight in America's halls of power? For many watching, the answer seemed obvious, and yet history told another story. Time and again, women of color who dared to stand tall in politics had been dismissed, talked over, caricatured as too loud, too angry, or out of place. It was a script as old as America's own contradictions, a story of voices muted by arrogance, masquerading as authority. And here, in this room, the script was playing out once again, live before the cameras. Miller's interruptions weren't just rude, they were symbolic. Each time he cut across Crockett, it echoed centuries of silencing, centuries of powerful men assuming their words were heavier simply because of who they were. Each raised hand to interject, each impatient sigh carried more than just personal disdain. It carried the weight of a system built to dismiss certain voices before they even had a chance to rise. That's why the room buzzed. That's why people leaned forward in their chairs, phones gripped tighter, live streams watched with white-knuckle anticipation. This wasn't only about the back and forth of 2 political figures. It was about the millions outside the room who had been waiting for someone, anyone, to refuse to be diminished. And the pressure was immense. Crockett knew that every pause, every choice, every syllable she allowed or withheld would ripple far beyond these walls. The crowd in the room might have been limited, but the audience outside was massive, hungry, and ready. Social media timelines pulsed with frustration. Hashtags bristled with anger at the familiar scene. Another powerful man trying to override a woman's voice before it could even land. People weren't just watching. They were aching for a moment that would flip the script. That's why it mattered. Not because one exchange could change all of history, but because one exchange could symbolize what so many had long felt, that democracy isn't real unless everyone at the table is allowed to speak without being steamrolled. That dignity isn't optional. That America cannot keep calling itself a beacon of freedom while letting arrogance define its debates. The room didn't know it yet, but they were perched on the edge of such a moment. The interruptions were piling up like kindling, and Crockett's composure was the spark waiting to strike. When it did, it wouldn't just answer Miller. It would answer a nation tired of watching the same disrespect on repeat. And once you know Miller's track record, you'll see why this clash was inevitable. To understand why the clash between Stephen Miller and Jasmine Crockett felt so electric, you have to step back and look at Miller's shadowed path through American politics. He wasn't just another face in the committee room. He carried with him a reputation forged in controversy, a persona honed in the furnace of combative strategy. To his admirers, he was sharp, unapologetic, relentless. To his critics, he was arrogance incarnate, a man more interested in winning an argument than in elevating the truth. Stephen Miller built his brand on confrontation. From his earliest days as an advisor, his voice was known not for empathy or understanding, but for its cutting precision and cold dismissal. He had perfected the art of speaking over people, not with them. In staff meetings, in television interviews, in speeches that rattled around the halls of power, he played the same role. The man who never conceded, never softened, never admitted doubt. Every encounter became a sparring match. Every opponent, a target to be bludgeoned into silence. But beneath the polish of his rehearsed lines and tailored suits, there was something shallow, something brittle. His power didn't come from lifting people up. It came from tearing them down. Again and again, he framed arrogance as authority, cruelty as toughness, dismissal as strength, and in doing so, he revealed his hand, a strategist who understood the optics of dominance, but never the weight of dignity. The controversies that followed him only deepened the image. Whether it was his role in pushing divisive policies that targeted immigrants, or his rhetoric that seemed to revel in division rather than unity, Miller became synonymous with exclusion. For many Americans, especially those who saw themselves in Jasmine Crockett's story, he represented the institutional sneer that said, "You don't belong here. Your voice doesn't matter. Sit down while I talk." Yet Miller carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. He could interrupt without consequence. He could dismiss without pushback. He could wield his words like weapons and still walk away untouched. This was the hypocrisy at his core. A man who demanded respect while offering none, who preached about American values while demeaning the very people those values were supposed to protect. That hypocrisy didn't stop with policy. It spilled into the smallest moments, the way he cut off colleagues mid-sentence, the way he mocked opponents in sound bites designed to go viral, the way he framed his own condescension as clarity. He wrapped arrogance in a suit and tie, sold it as conviction, and expected the world to bow. But arrogance, unchecked, always carries a flaw. It blinds. It convinces the villain that the stage is theirs alone, that the crowd will never turn, that the interruptions will never backfire. Miller's persona wasn't built for endurance. It was built for domination. And domination has a way of burning itself out when it meets someone who refuses to be diminished. That's what made this hearing so combustible. Every time Miller leaned forward with another interruption, he wasn't just flexing his authority, he was exposing it for what it really was: fragile, performative, hollow. The more he tried to press down, the more the cracks began to show. To him, this was routine. To the room, it was theater. To Crockett, it was an invitation. And invitations like that are dangerous for men like Stephen Miller. Because arrogance only works when the other side plays along, when the interruptions succeed in throwing someone off balance. But Crockett didn't play along. She absorbed, she endured, she sharpened her silence into a weapon far stronger than his noise. Each attempt to dominate was not a victory, but a step closer to exposing his weakness. Miller thought he was writing the script, but in reality, he was building the stage for a performance he couldn't control. His arrogance was no longer a mask of authority. It was a mirror reflecting everything he hoped to hide. But the more he tried to dominate, the more he set the stage for his own downfall. Long before Jasmine Crockett walked into that committee room, she had already been through battles that would have broken most people. Her story didn't begin under the bright lights of national politics. but in courtrooms where the odds were stacked high ag. In many ways, Crockett represented more than herself in that room. She embodied every woman of color who had walked into a space and been told, directly or indirectly, that her voice didn't carry the same weight. She carried their frustration, their strength, their longing for a moment of reversal. She became a vessel for something larger, the possibility that dignity, rooted in lived experience, could stand taller than arrogance, dressed up as authority. That's why people leaned toward her when the interruptions began. They weren't just watching Jasmine Crockett. They were watching themselves, their mothers, their sisters, their communities in her composure. Her calm stare wasn't just directed at Miller. It was directed at history itself, a stare that said, "I know what you've tried to do to voices like mine, but it ends here." So when Miller tried to cut her down, again and again, Crockett didn't rush. She let the storm play out. She absorbed it, every sneer, every sharp word, every interruption that echoed with centuries of dismissal. And in that silence, in that patience, she was gathering strength. The very tactic Miller thought would overwhelm her became the fuel for the moment that was about to come. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't in that room to win an argument. She was there to show what it means when a community refuses to be silenced anymore. And when her moment finally came, when she decided to unleash the words she had been holding in reserve, it wouldn't just be a response to Miller, it would be an answer to a nation. And when the interruptions came one after another, Crockett's restraint became her secret weapon. The exchange began like a flicker, a quick interruption that might have been brushed off in any other setting. Stephen Miller leaned forward, voice clipped, tone condescending, as if to signal that the woman across from him had spoken long enough. It was interruption number 1, and though it broke her rhythm, Jasmine Crockett didn't falter. She steadied her voice, smoothed the edges, and continued. But Miller wasn't done. Barely a sentence later, his words came again, this time louder, sharper, dripping with disdain. Interruption number 2. A ripple moved through the room, heads turning, staffers exchanging glances, reporters' pens scratching faster against notepads. Crockett's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her tone tightening, sharpening, but still, she refused to yield the floor. By the third interruption, murmurs began spreading across the chamber. Some leaned back in their chairs with uneasy smiles, as though they were witnessing a predictable but uncomfortable performance. Others leaned forward, bracing themselves for what was coming. Cameras clicked, capturing the collision in real time, every frame a piece of a growing storm. Crockett's patience was visible, taut, stretched, but intact. She adjusted her posture, leaned slightly closer to the microphone, and with a controlled calm, pushed forward. Miller, emboldened by his own performance, went in again. Interruption number 4 landed like a slap across the room. This time, Crockett's pause was longer. She fixed her gaze directly on him. Silence filling the chamber for a beat longer than anyone expected. It wasn't a retreat, it was a reminder. A reminder that she heard every word, every attempt to diminish her, and that she was cataloging each one. The silence itself became a kind of defiance. The 5th interruption came with force, his words colliding with hers mid-sentence, cutting her thought in half. The arrogance was unmistakable now. The strategy clear. Overwhelm. Unsettle. Dominate. But Crockett didn't break. Instead, her tone shifted. The warmth cooled. The patience remained. But now it carried an edge, deliberate, honed, almost surgical. Her words pressed on, tighter and more precise. Each one a signal that she would not be erased. By now, the entire room was holding its breath. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Social media timelines were lighting up in real time, clips of the mounting tension spreading even before the exchange reached its climax. The collective question pulsed through everyone watching. How much more can she take? And then it came the 6th interruption. His voice cut across hers once more, louder than before, like he needed to stamp out any trace of her presence. The arrogance had turned to overconfidence. The interruptions, less controlled strategy, and more raw reflex. Crockett's face remained still, her body language calm, but her eyes told a different story. They blazed not with anger, but with certainty, with the clarity of someone who had endured enough and chosen her moment. The air shifted. The chamber, once buzzing with chatter, now fell into an uneasy quiet. Miller's words still echoed, his interruption hanging in the air like smoke after a firecracker. And in that charged silence, everyone in the room seemed to sense it. The line had been crossed, the patience had reached its edge, and the reckoning was seconds away. And then, with his sixth interruption still hanging in the air, she delivered the line that silenced him. For a heartbeat, the chamber was frozen. Miller's voice still lingered in the air like smoke, harsh and unfinished. But the silence that followed was louder than any of his words. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her hands folded, her eyes steady on him. She did not rush to respond, did not stumble to reclaim her time. Instead, she let the silence expand, stretch, and weigh heavy on every ear in that room. That pause was her weapon. It forced every interruption to echo back at its source. The more the silence grew, the smaller Miller seemed, his bluster shrinking against the weight of her calm. By now, every person in the chamber leaned forward, waiting for the collision they knew was coming. Staffers' pens hovered over notebooks, cameras zoomed tight on Crockett's face, and even those who had grown numb to political theater felt their hearts race. Something was about to happen. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, deliberate, steady as stone. She didn't need to raise it. The quiet authority cut deeper than shouting ever could. "Mr. Miller," she began, each syllable deliberate, "you've interrupted me 6 times. And yet, after all that noise, the only thing you've made clear is that you are afraid of what I have to say." The words fell like thunder in a room that had been holding its breath. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber, soft but unmistakable, the sound of an audience stunned by the precision of the strike. Chairs shifted. Some leaned back as if to distance themselves from the impact. Others leaned forward, unwilling to miss a single expression on Miller's face. For the first time that day, he had no words. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. Crockett pressed on, her tone even sharper now, not with anger, but with clarity. "This isn't about me, and it isn't even about you. It's about whether voices like mine, voices of women, voices of color, voices of people who've been silenced for generations are allowed to be heard in these halls. And every time you cut me off, you proved exactly why we're still fighting to be heard." It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was an indictment, not only of Miller's arrogance, but of every interruption that echoed through history. In that moment, she wasn't just Jasmine Crockett. She was a chorus of unheard voices answering back through her. The room seemed to tilt. Miller sat stiff, his confidence draining as if someone had pulled a rug out from under him. His interruptions, once sharp, now looked flimsy in the light of Crockett's composure. The strategist who had built a career on dominating every room suddenly looked small, not because his voice was quiet, but because her dignity had eclipsed his noise. It wasn't just an answer. The narrator's voice layered over the moment, deep and resonant. It was a reckoning. People in the chamber weren't just hearing her words, they were feeling them. You could almost sense the inner monologues running wild in every head. Finally, someone said it. "This is the moment we've been waiting for." She just flipped the script. Reporters scribbled frantically, aware they were capturing a headline that would travel far beyond these 4 walls. Aides shifted nervously, realizing the soundbites from this exchange would define not only the hearing, but perhaps their boss's reputation for years to come. And the cameras, oh, the cameras captured every twitch of Miller's jaw, every flicker in his eyes, every ounce of silence he could not escape. Meanwhile, Crockett's delivery remained calm, steady, surgical. She didn't revel in the moment, didn't gloat or shout. She knew the power of restraint. Each sentence she delivered carried the weight of centuries behind it, as though every pause, every breath had been waiting for this exact collision. "You tried to silence me," she continued, her tone unbroken. "But all you did was prove why voices like mine need to be louder. And no matter how many times you cut in, no matter how many times you dismiss, this truth will outlast every interruption." The words landed not just in the chamber, but across screens nationwide. Even those watching from home could feel the shift, that electric moment when arrogance collapses under the weight of dignity. Miller looked rattled, his usual sharpness dulled, his posture stiff, as if bracing against an invisible blow. Crockett, on the other hand, looked unshaken, her calm growing stronger with each passing second. The ripple moved outward. You could imagine the thoughts racing through those watching. This isn't just her win, this is our win. This is what it looks like when patience turns into power. This is what it feels like. When dignity finally takes the mic. The tension that had built for minutes now broke, replaced by a current that surged through the room. The crowd shifted from uneasy silence to quiet awe. Some smirked, some shook their heads in disbelief, and some simply sat frozen, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would live far beyond the confines of this hearing. Miller tried, briefly, to regain footing, shifting in his seat, lips parting as though to reassert control. But the timing was gone. The authority he had banked on had slipped away. His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. And Crockett? She didn't need to press further. She knew she had landed the blow. The moment belonged to her now, not because she shouted him down, but because she had rendered him irrelevant. This was more than an exchange. It was a transfer of power, a rebalancing of the scales. For the first time in that chamber, the noise had quieted, and the truth stood tall. But the true shockwaves didn't stay inside that room. The silence inside that chamber didn't last long. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words hit the air, cameras captured them, microphones sealed them, and within minutes they were flying far beyond the wood-paneled room where they were first spoken. What had been a clash between two people now became a national event. On social media, it started with a spark, a single clip posted by a staffer, just 20 seconds long. But that spark caught fire instantly. Hashtags flooded timelines within the hour. Crockett clapped back. He couldn't handle her. Voices unmuted. Memes erupted almost as fast as the hashtags. One split-screen image showed Miller mid-interruption on one side, and Crockett's poised, devastating response on the other, captioned simply, "Volume, Bufor, Ding3, Utwo, Power." Another meme looped Miller's stunned silence like a GIF, paired with captions that read, "When you run out of privilege mid-sentence." Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every platform hummed with the same current. Teenagers clipped the moment into sound bites for their edits. Activists called it a textbook example of composure in the face of arrogance. And ordinary people, far from Washington, opened their phones during lunch breaks and felt something stir inside. One user wrote, "She spoke for me, for my mom, for every time we were told to shut up." Another, "This is what happens when dignity shows up prepared." Late-night comedy didn't take long to pounce either. Within hours, hosts were replaying the clip with relish, setting it up as the David and Goliath showdown of the week. Punchlines wrote themselves. Stephen Miller interrupted 6 times, but after the 7th, he finally got what every American wanted for him: silence. The audience roared with laughter, but beneath it was something else, the deep satisfaction of seeing arrogance humbled on national television. And it wasn't just comedy shows. Commentators across the political spectrum dissected the moment, replaying Crockett's calm as though it were a play in a championship game. Some marveled at her restraint. Others highlighted the historical symbolism. A black woman refusing to be erased, standing her ground not through volume but through clarity. One analyst put it plainly, "This wasn't just a takedown. It was a cultural reset." For millions of Americans, the moment became a mirror. People who had faced condescension in classrooms, interruptions in boardrooms, dismissals in everyday conversations, suddenly felt vindicated. They saw themselves in Crockett's pause, in her patience, in the exact timing of her response. It wasn't just political drama anymore, it was personal validation. Neighborhood barbershops replayed the clip on TVs above mirrors. College students shared it in group chats with messages like, "This is how you handle it." Families around kitchen tables nodded as they watched. Grandparents recalling their own struggles to be heard in rooms that tried to silence them. The resonance stretched far beyond party lines. It hit something primal, the universal hunger for dignity. The ripple effect didn't just uplift Crockett, it reframed the entire narrative. For once, the story wasn't about who shouted loudest, but about who held steady when it mattered most. It wasn't about dominance. It was about poise. And for an America increasingly weary of political chaos, that mattered. People were tired of noise. They craved clarity. The headlines reflected that shift. Crockett flips the script. From interrupted to unshaken. When dignity wins, news anchors replayed the moment like sports highlights, narrating every pause, every word, every flicker of Miller's face. Commentators noted that this wasn't just another viral clash. It was a reminder of how respect, once wielded with precision, could strip arrogance of its armor. But more than the media spin, it was the grassroots energy that gave the moment its staying power. Activists used the clip to fundraise for women candidates. Teachers shared it with students as an example of how to handle bullies with restraint. Even in workplaces, the phrase, "the seventh time," became shorthand for holding your ground until the exact moment it mattered most. In a country divided, here was something rare, a unifying symbol, not because everyone agreed with Crockett politically, but because everyone recognized the human drama in that pause, that patience, that mic drop. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was theater, morality play, and cultural parable wrapped into one. And Miller? His silence became its own meme, replayed endlessly, dissected as a failure of strategy. Commentators noted that for a man who had built a career on dominating the frame, he had just been erased from it. His brand of interruption, once effective, had been neutralized by a single moment of restraint. The cultural narrative was shifting, and for once, it wasn't chaos or cynicism that led the way. It was dignity. It was the idea that composure itself could be revolutionary, that patience wasn't weakness but a sharpened weapon waiting for the right strike. The hashtags kept climbing. The memes kept spreading. The clips replayed again and again, looping on timelines like a mantra. You don't have to outshout arrogance. You just have to outlast it. But what does this teach us beyond the headlines? In the end, this clash was never just about one congresswoman and one political operative. It was never simply Crockett versus Miller. No, it was dignity against arrogance, truth against noise, substance against show. The chamber became a stage, and what unfolded was a lesson America desperately needed to remember. The strongest voices are not always the loudest, but the clearest. Because think about it, Miller's strategy was volume, disruption, the attempt to overwhelm with interruption after interruption, to bury her words under his own noise. It's a tactic as old as power itself. If you can't control the truth, try to drown it out. But Crockett's strategy? Stillness, patience, timing. She didn't compete for dominance. She embodied composure until the moment came when her voice would land like thunder. And that is why the room froze. That is why the country listened. This moment speaks to something bigger than politics. It speaks to how we live together. Respect is not a luxury in democracy. It is the oxygen. Without respect, hearings turn into circus acts, debates collapse into shouting matches, and citizens lose faith in the very idea that truth can survive the noise. What Crockett reminded us is that respect is not granted by titles or demanded by volume. It is earned, and sometimes it is commanded by the sheer force of dignity. There is a reason her words rippled far beyond Washington. They tapped into the universal experience of being talked over, underestimated, dismissed. Every teacher who's been ignored in their own classroom, every worker whose ideas were stolen in a meeting, every daughter or mother who's been told to stay quiet recognized themselves in that moment. And just as importantly, they recognized the path forward. You don't have to mirror arrogance with arrogance. You don't have to meet noise with more noise. Heroism sometimes looks like patience held until it transforms into precision. That is the kind of heroism democracy needs. Not the grandstanding, not the ego battles, not the sound bites crafted for applause lines. Real heroism is the willingness to stand taller when someone tries to cut you down. Real heroism is choosing clarity when chaos tempts you to shout. Crockett didn't win because she silenced him. She won because she elevated the room. She made people remember what dignity sounds like. And that is why this moment matters. Because democracy is not measured only in votes or laws. It's measured in how we treat one another in the small, visible moments, in the hearings, in the town halls, in the conversations where power tries to intimidate truth. If democracy is to survive, it won't be because the loudest voices always prevail. It will be because enough people, like Crockett, chose to stand taller rather than shout louder. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reminder that arrogance eventually unravels itself, that patience can outlast provocation, and that dignity has a way of rewriting the story. But here's the deeper question. If moments like this truly matter, if they restore some faith that respect can still cut through the noise, then what is our role in amplifying them? 6 interruptions, 1 reply, a room transformed. That's what we just witnessed, not a routine exchange, not another forgettable clash of talking points, but a turning point that reminded us why truth still matters in the middle of all the noise. Stephen Miller came armed with arrogance, with the old playbook of cutting people off, of treating volume like power. But Jasmine Crockett came with something stronger, dignity sharpened by patience, a voice that refused to be buried, a presence that reminded everyone watching that respect is not weakness and silence is not surrender. Moments like this reveal the truth about power. Arrogance may dominate the floor for a while, but dignity carves the lasting impression. Noise fills the chamber, but clarity lingers in memory. This is the difference between those who chase control and those who carry purpose. Crockett's reply wasn't just a rebuttal. It was proof that when you stand tall in the face of disrespect, you don't just win an argument, you change the atmosphere. And here's where you come in. Because this story doesn't end in that committee room. It only matters if it lives beyond it. If people like you take it, share it, and amplify it. These are the moments that restore faith in democracy, in representation, in the idea that voices rooted in respect will always outlast arrogance. So, if you believe dignity should always cut deeper than noise, don't let this moment fade. Share this video. Talk about it. Be part of amplifying the voices that carry truth with clarity and strength. Because when we lift them higher, we all stand taller.